the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs Leadership Development Podcast, where we explore elements of today's fire service. This podcast is for Metro Chiefs by Metro Chiefs, engaging in conversations about the challenges and opportunities that matter most to the leaders in our association. While this series is created with Metro members in mind, the topics we explore are also relevant to current or aspiring chief officers and departments of any size across the U.S. and around the world. I'm your host, Alec Otten, and today I have the privilege of sitting down with an incredibly valuable member of the Metro Chiefs team, a person who's instrumental in helping knuckleheads like me from across the country navigate the political and legislative landscape, also influencing a variety of issues that significantly impact the nation's fire service. The IAFC's Director of Government Relations and Policy, Ken LaSala. Ken, it's great to see you. A little bit of background. Ken has served in this role with the IAFC since 2005. There he leads a team representing America's fire service leadership before Congress, the White House, and federal agencies, all small potatoes, right? Before joining the IAFC, he spent 8 years on Capitol Hill serving as a staffer for Senator John McCain, who, before we started recording, had a great conversation about the man and that experience. But serving him on the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, covering critical issues like Homeland Security, election reform, and technology policy. Ken holds a bachelor's in government and politics from the University of Maryland and a master's in international relations from the University of Chicago. He's also actively involved with our association, the Metro Chiefs, and serves as the liaison for the IAFC's Terrorism and Homeland Security Committee. In recognition of your outstanding work and leadership, Ken received the IAFC President's Award of Recognition both in 2016 and in 2023. I'm sure just winning that one time is a monumental task. Ken's extensive Capitol Hill background, paired with nearly 2 decades of advocating for the nation's fire chiefs on federal policy, gives him a very unique and authoritative perspective on the role that fire service leaders play in shaping laws and funding that protect our communities. Ken, it's an absolute honor to have you with us today. Is there anything that I missed in your bio that you'd like our listeners to know about you?
Thanks, Chief Otten. Well, probably the big thing is I just want to clarify that I have the honor and the privilege of being the IFC staff liaison to the Metro Chiefs. So I always appreciate working with the Metro Chiefs. The Metro Chiefs board is always, just a great bunch of, folks, to be honest, to work with. Obviously, I respect the hard work that they do, but also it's just a pleasure spending time with them. So I'm always grateful for my time with the Metro Chiefs and the opportunity to speak today. And then I also have the good fortune to be the staff liaison besides the Terrorism Committee, also with the IFC Urban Search and Rescue Committee. So those are also a great bunch of folks. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Definitely some changes going on there as well, as we've seen recently in the news, at least where we stand today in July. We were chatting about this early, and I think one of the reasons that it was so important to the leadership development team to get this topic on our discussion list was really because, we're an industry where we kind of work our way up from the mailroom all the way to the C-suite. And a lot of times we miss some of the critical items that are going to be part of our job. And I shared with you that I really didn't have an idea until I was maybe a deputy chief in the fire department that legislative affairs were important and influenced how we operated, the laws that we operated under and funding. And so we'll dive in with that general question, which is the first one, which is why should fire chiefs be engaged in legislative affairs, and how does that role in legislative affairs align with their overall leadership responsibilities?
Well, let me start off by just saying, thanks obviously for having me today. It's a great opportunity to be able to chat about this issue. Obviously, it's very important to me personally, but also it's important to the fire service and to your communities. Probably the key takeaway from here is the local fire chief is the most trusted voice in their community. So when a fire chief is up on Capitol Hill or meeting with their federal officials, they're really doing something very important to protect their community and to provide service to their community. From the fire service perspective, the federal government covers more than one would think about. I mean, obviously, the local fire department budget is, controlled by the local authority. You guys have your, local taxes to pay for things. You have local HR and things like that, how you hire people. But a lot of this stuff is really driven by the federal government. Funding comes through, like the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA for the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program and the Safer Grant Program and Fire Prevention and Safety, and UASI and the State Homeland Security Grant Program, even like volunteer fire assistance. I mean, that's all hundreds of millions of dollars every year that goes to local fire departments. But it's more than just that. Volunteers are covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Things like your fire apparatus. We're now coming up in a couple of years. So there's going to be major changes to how fire apparatus operate. Well, that's driven by emission standards by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. Communications. FirstNet. We worked really hard to create FirstNet. So when there's a major disaster or even a local incident, when fire, EMS, and law enforcement all roll up on scene, they can communicate with each other through the federal FirstNet public safety broadband system. OSHA standards. There's big discussion in Congress, but also in the federal government, starting actually originally with the George W. Bush administration about broadening out the industrial fire brigade standard to cover fire departments across the country. If that ends up being enacted, that's going to affect a lot of fire department operations. EMS, there's a whole bunch of issues related to that, including Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement. So pretty much you can walk around a fire station and everything you look at has some relation to the federal government. So it's important to be involved because all that affects literally what you do every day.
So you've got this, I can imagine what your whiteboard looks like, right? It's probably like the beautiful mind, right? You get this whiteboard of all these different interfaces between what federal policy is doing and the fire service that you obviously care deeply about, which we appreciate. Which ones are really rising to the top of your list on that whiteboard, the ones that are written in red, where you're anticipating really significant impacts to fire departments? And then how do people like me stay informed about the evolving policy landscape at the federal, state, and local levels too?
Okay, I'll take it backwards if you don't mind. The IAFC, we have a couple of different ways for fire chiefs to keep up to date on what's going on. We have the weekly Washington update that informs our members about what's happening on Capitol Hill. So it's easy just to go to that. It's usually like a page or two of what's going on, including major executive orders, legislation, what's going on with appropriations, money, even I think we go into stuff about federal regulation when it's relevant. So if you just want to know what happened this week in government, or at least federal government, you can take a look at our Washington update. We also have our hot sheet, which we update monthly. And that's really a list of the issues which we are focusing on Capitol Hill for that month. I mean, obviously, we're always talking about fire and safer funding. We're always talking about the U.S. Fire Administration. And then we go into bills like, the need to protect FirstNet. There's some bills out right now regarding creating regulations to make sure that e-mobility and e-bikes are fire safe. There's some issues, some legislation out there again to allow the families of public safety officers that die from job-related cancers to be eligible for the PSOB program. So all these are listed on our hot sheet, and fire chiefs can just go to the IFC website, download that, read through it, and when we meet with their members of Congress or the congressional staff, they can both use that as talking points and then leave it behind afterwards. So that's always a great resource. And then also when we have major issues or there's going to be important votes up on Capitol Hill. We also have our Legislative Action Center, and that's really fast. It makes it really easy for a chief to spend, I think someone told me recently, about 2 or 3 minutes. You just input in the system your name, your address, and there's a pre-populated message about which bills are important. Hit a button, and literally the email will either go to your House member or your senators, depending on whether or not it's a House or Senate issue. So there's a lot of really good tools that we try to make available to IFC members and Metro Chiefs to be able to keep up to date about what's going on in Capitol Hill. So with that, the big issues really, and a couple of different pieces. First, there's the annual appropriations bills. The federal budget year starts on October 1st. So for fiscal year 2026, Congress has to pass all the appropriations bills by October 1st to fund the different federal programs. So right now they're going through the process of developing those. It'll be interesting because some of the partisanship that's happened here in DC is going to make the appropriations process harder this year. So we'll see if they can get any appropriations bills passed by October 1st. If they need to pass what they call continuing resolution, which basically says government operations will continue, or if they end up shutting down the government. All that we're going to have to see kind of where we are, as we get towards the end of September. Which would be fun, September, especially if you sell roll aids. I think the other thing is, we're watching what's going on with FEMA reform. The IFC has actually created a DHS FEMA task force. It's chaired by Chief Jim Schwartz, who was the former fire chief of Arlington County. We actually have Chief John Butler, the Metro chair or Metro president, is representing the Metro Chiefs on that task force, and they're developing recommendations to the administration for their FEMA Reform Council. So we're watching what's going on with that. The administration also is proposing major changes to the wildland fire space. They want to consolidate all the wildland fire suppression operations into a new U.S. Wildland Fire Service, which would be part of the Department of Interior. So we're busy, trying to work with the Department of Interior to give them recommendations so that when they do this new consolidation, they include the needs of especially local fire agencies, but also state fire agencies too, including volunteer fire departments, which serve an important part, especially in rural America, for responding to wildland fires. And those are kind of the big things. I mean, the other thing is the federal FirstNet network faces a February 2027 sunset date. So we need to preserve FirstNet and make sure we get rid of that sunset date so that the federal FirstNet network will be operating into the future. I mean, as long as we have disasters and unfortunately all these threats of terrorism and active shooters, we're always going to need fire, EMS, and law enforcement to be able to communicate together, and especially bring in resources from outside their jurisdictions or even outside the region or across the country who can all talk to each other there on the incident scene. So those are some of the really, really big issues. And then there's a whole bunch of things about EMS, which we'll talk about later.
So, I mean, appropriation bills, FEMA reform, wildland consolidation, FirstNet, these are all super critical. You've mentioned, which is pretty new to me, the Legislative Action Center, which gives you the ability to very quickly weigh in on this by sort of sending that automated letter to the representatives that represent me in the Senate and the House. Are there other ways? Are there other practical ways where fire chiefs can advocate for these policy questions, or for their departments, for funding, for staffing, for safety initiatives or PSOB benefits? Like how else do we weigh in and do that? I think a lot of times people feel like, my voice doesn't matter. I'm one of, a bazillion people that live here, and they're not going to hear me or certainly not incorporate my preference or my recommendation. So how do we do that? What are some practical ways that we can do that?
Oh, yeah. First of all, Chief, as a local fire chief, your voice definitely matters. I mean, members of Congress really want to hear from their local fire chiefs. They want to know what um, you need to make life better for your fire department. So far, fingers crossed, the fire service is still a bipartisan issue. We always have, in the past, like you said, conservatives like Sarah McCain were very supportive of the fire service. Bernie Sanders, who technically is a socialist, another big supporter of the fire service. Over the years, we've talked to different members who are both conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, independent. They're all big supporters of the fire emergency service. So definitely people want to hear what you have to say. How do you do it? First of all, what you really want to do is not just be the person who shows up every once in a while, but you want to establish a good relationship with the office. For example, pretty much everybody who worked for Sarah McCain knew Chief Dennis Compton. He was the Mesa Fire Chief. He was really good about being helpful and being a resource and being seen as, kind of at the time he was considered like the voice of the Arizona Fire Service. On the Hill, Chief Brunacini obviously is incredibly influential for many reasons, but he really was not as active on Capitol Hill as someone like Chief Compton. So we knew if there was some fire issue, we would call Chief Compton and say like, "Hey, Chief, what do you think?" He'd tell us. So that's a key thing which you want to be, and then from that you can always call me, Stephen, or Eddie at the IFC. We'll be glad to give you an update of what's going on about the major issues. And then from there, it's just a matter of either if you're going to come to D.C., meeting with the members of Congress here. I'll put in a cheap pitch for the Congressional Fire Services dinner. That always comes out in the springtime. Definitely recommend coming to D.C. for that, obviously attending the dinner, but using that day to actually meet with your members of Congress here in D.C., because there's where you really meet with the legislative staff and try to build a relationship with them. But you don't always have to get on a plane to come to D.C. Probably the best thing to do, too, is every member of Congress has a district director and every senator has a state director. And reaching out to those folks in the state, luckily most of the time it's still a local phone call, invite them out to the fire station, especially if you're getting an AFG or SAFER grant, invite the staff out, schedule something for the member of Congress to show up. In the old days, they used to have these big checks that they'd show up to present the fire chief in front of the firehouse. They love that because it looks good for re-election. You get some free PR with local news. But yeah, so meet with the staff there in the state, let them know what's going on. And I'll tell you, pretty much every day, the senator or representative calls the district director and says, "Hey, what are the big issues out there?" And we've had at times, the guy in D.C. may have his eyes on working for, some carrier or something like that in communications issues. But the guy in the district is saying like, "Hey, I need to get my boss reelected." And all the fire chiefs and all the, police chiefs are on me about this public safety communication stuff. So we need to be voting with these guys. Otherwise, it's going to be a tough time getting reelected. So, it's good to come to D.C., meet with the legislative staff, but also build a great relationship with the congressional staff there in the district, and invite them over for ride-alongs, stuff like that. The staff think it's cool, members think it's cool. It's a fun time.
I think it always seems like so out of reach, right? That those folks are just so incredibly busy. I know some of the interactions I've had, it always seems like they have to whisk them through. It's this. You got 20 minutes. Here's the format. It's very formalized. And interestingly, I've found that at least my representatives enjoy a little bit more of that relax, because I think some of that's the staffers kind of pushing them through, and they really, if they like the people that they're connecting with, they try and slow that down and get a little more of a personal connection, which is great. I could see Denny being amazing at that, right? And we were talking before we started recording about statesmen, right? And the sort of the dying art of statesmanship, and Denny is one of the greatest statesmen. In fact, the last podcast that aired was with Denny. He's amazing, but what made him great other than his personality, right? His statesman-like qualities. How did he prepare for interactions with lawmakers, and why did his meetings look very successful during testimony or just those interactions from your perspective?
Well, I mean, Chief Compton actually sent me one of his books on leadership. So even I've read
it's a good
book.
one. You should read it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Even I've read his books. You'd have to talk to Chief Compton, whatever he did. But, there's a couple of things you can do just really easy. First, download our hot sheet. That's a key thing. And then a lot of it's just, so the hot sheet outlines what the issues are, and then just kind of pick the issues that best reflect your needs. If the fire department is going for an AFG grant, or has received an Assistance to Firefighters grant, be able to explain how it affects your department. So, if you're meeting with your member of Congress, be able to explain what the Assistance to Firefighters grant program is. Be sure to point out that it's a matching grant to go straight to local fire departments, so you guys receive it. It doesn't go through the states. And then, explain how it helps your fire department. What were you able to get with it? How does it improve your operations? Why is it important? And then if you're applying for one in the future, let them know, because a lot of times they'll write letters in support of your grant. I think there's two parts. I know you had something about this later, but one, also make sure that you've got your data. Make sure you can, these days everybody likes data. The Trump administration folks are all into data. So be able to explain, if it improves your response time or how many incidents you're able to answer and things like that, or incidents you could respond to and things like that. But also remember, like, you're telling a story. Sometimes we have, members who come in, they kind of just read the hot sheet, I want this, that, and the other. And of course, you're out in 15 minutes. So it's an efficient use of time for everybody. But I don't think the staff totally get it. I know, like, Chief Kerr, I think she used to teach like elementary school or something. And she was always really great with the congressional staff because they were like in their 20s. And she was always good about explaining like what the program was and telling the story about why it's important and how the program's effective. And that's really the key. Like, you basically, when you're talking to the members of Congress, you need to have a beginning, a middle, and end. Like, beginning, here's the problem. Middle, here's the solution. End, this is why I need you to go vote to support more funding for AFG and SAFER. So if you just read the hot sheet, it's great. But definitely use it. But if you're talking about, the Honoring Our Fallen Heroes Act, which would extend PSOB benefits to the families of firefighters who died of cancer, be sure to mention, if members, public safety officers who've died of cancer, which unfortunately most people in the fire service do, or, talk about, people in your department. So that way you explain to them, like, this is not some esoteric thing we're talking about. This really affects the department and affects constituents of that member of Congress. And I think if you can, explain that out, that works out really well.
How important is knowing your audience? Like, how important is researching your representative or your senator before you go in? Because like I always tell my folks, I'm the fire chief, but I'm the chief storytelling officer, right? Mm-hmm. Because even in our city, the elected body, they might remember data on response times or fire confinement or cardiac arrest survival statistics, but really you have to work to connect that with one of their constituents, right? The story, the human side of it. I mean, all these folks are here making decisions. They're humans making decisions for other humans. Do you find yourself learning a lot about the people who you're going to meet with? What's their story? We talked about Senator McCain, knowing his time in the Navy and trying to establish that connection or tie it to some of the initiatives that we're working on, instead of just presenting raw data, telling the story, but also telling it in a manner that aligns with perhaps some of their life experience to build a stronger connection.
Yeah, Chief, that's a really great point. And a lot of times you can just go to the member of Congress's webpage and download their bio, or, we can always go to Wikipedia. But because actually a lot of folks do have some background in either fire or EMS. like, for example, Congressman G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania, he's a volunteer firefighter, and he used to keep his gear like in the back of his car. As far as I know, he still does. So, if you have a discussion with him, it's going to be like really granular. And then other members are, they have some experience with EMS one way or the other as being, being medical doctors and things like that. So it's good to know. And then a lot of them also come from state or local government. So I know at least, I know when we used to have like Chief Jenkins, one of the members of Congress we met with knew him because he had appointed him to be fire chief years ago. So in some cases, you may already know that, or it's, obviously if it's someone it makes it easier to go lobby them and call them and things. But I find a lot of fire chiefs actually have really close relationships with a lot of their elected members of Congress. And, they'll tell me like, oh, I text so-and-so, and he texts back to me and things like that. So, yeah.
That's great. How do you, I'm going to skip around a little bit from the draft questions I sent you, but how do you build and sustain relationships with these people who are so busy? And sometimes when, especially you have priorities that aren't necessarily aligned, how do you do that? And that might be a very elementary question where you just, well, it's just people are people, but in your experience, what's the most effective ways to really build and maintain, I think ultimately, right, trust with them so that you can at least have a door open to express your position or to share your position on a topic?
Yeah, that's harder these days, especially like in the House. For the Senate too, there's been a lot more turnover. The House is good. The House especially goes back and forth all the time between who's the majority. So there's a lot of people who kind of churn through as members of Congress. I would say, first, remember the fire chief's the most trusted person in the community. So when you meet with the members of Congress or their staff, make sure that, you're your facts straight. If they ask you something you don't know, just be sure to say, let me get back to you. And then obviously you have to get back to them. So in that way, just make sure that they always see you as a trusted source and you have integrity. And then second, the easiest way to get somebody, like you mentioned earlier, is invite them to come out to visit the fire station in the district. The August recess is coming up. In fact, the House actually went into recess early. So for the whole month of August, your members of Congress on the House side, but in the Senate too, are probably going to have some quality time. So that's a great time to invite them to come by the firehouse, for a pancake breakfast or something of that sort, where they can kind of hang out. Everybody likes to see fire trucks. Everybody likes to see ambulances, so it gives an opportunity for them to do something that's a little bit less stressful. And they get to learn more about, how the fire department works. I think there's also probably going to be a break, in October for a couple of different holidays and things like that. So that may be something else to take a look at. And then, when a bill comes up that's important, you can contact them. And like I said, if you build a relationship either with a member of Congress, with their legislative staff, or even the folks in the district who are probably going to be easier to get a hold of, that's when it'll pay off. When a bill that's important is on the floor or being marked up in committee, then they already know who you are. And so when you call, they'll say, okay, great, we know what we need to do. And you've really made it when they proactively start calling you and asking you about different bills.
That's great. It's like we've all had friends that just call us when they need us, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the basic human principles, right? Everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten, kind of an approach. Yep. So you have knocked some things out of the park, right? You're, as evidenced by the awards that you've been given and the success that you've had in being such an important person for the IAFC and the Metro Chiefs. And can you share examples of what perhaps was your proudest success, legislative success, something maybe that you never thought would make it, right? And you were able to, through your actions and your partners in that, make it a success, or even one that you were like, this was an epic failure, right? We all love talking about our failures, but this did not go well. And Why, and what did you learn from those experiences? Why do you think they were either successful or not? And what did you learn, or what changed in the way you approach some of these things?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, one big thing is we continue to reauthorize funding for the Fire and Safer programs and for the USFA. And those are like every 5 years. So it's always kind of an iterative process. We always learn something new. The big takeaway from those is always it's good to have friends. Both the one thing the fire groups have been really good about, through the Congressional Fire Service Institute, but IFF, NBFC, the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, National Fire Protection Association, some of the other groups too, like, state fire marshals, but we work really closely together. I talk to the IFF lobbyist probably like daily, and then at least a couple of times a week to the NBFC lobbyist or like the CFSI lobbyist. So, we always try to make sure that we're always work to make sure that we present a unified front. So that's always great. And then you look at something like the creation of FirstNet. That was all the fire groups and law enforcement, and we had EMS, and then we even had state and local governments. So it wasn't just like the IFC or something like that. We had like pretty much even the governors were involved in support of creating the federal FirstNet network. So something like that, it's always good to have friends. And then it's good for an organization like the IFC that we have integrity here in DC, because people are more likely to want to work with us. And it really helps us down the road, to kind of push forward our goals, because, we stay focused on the needs of the local fire chief and what our members need. And so people know when they come to us, they're hearing exactly what it is their local fire department needs. And so it's a virtuous cycle.
That's great. And that's actually what my next question was when you talk about, so what I'm hearing you say is the success is largely when you do your forensic analysis of those is largely because of coalitions, associations that come together with a unified voice on a topic or a position on a legislative issue. That all relies, though, on people testifying, right? Like, you have to get the right people in the room. This isn't on the list, so here's my curveball for you, Ken. But we talked about how to prepare. Who do you see? What attributes do you see out of people who do really well in that setting? Because all these groups can come together, and you can have the IAFF, IAFC, NBFC, NFFF, all these folks coming together, but you got to have people testifying, right? Who does that well? You don't have to name names, but what qualities lead to somebody who you're like, we need to get this guy or girl to get up there and talk to these folks because they're going to resonate with the legislators?
Mm-hmm. Well, so from the IFC perspective, we'll get a request to testify at a hearing. And then our first step is to go check with the IFC president. And then he or she may end up being the witness, or they may designate somebody else, like a committee chair or, section chair or something of that sort. But we've been lucky. We've always had really great witnesses. I can think of some great stories over the years. But we've always had good people. And one of the reasons why is our members do the homework ahead of time. Like, they talk to us, the staff. We help them put together their testimony. They talk to the relevant, IFC committee chairs, and they talk to their staff at home. So when they present on the Hill, especially at a hearing or something of that sort, they're really good. They convey the message. Like I'm saying, they tell the story. Like, okay, here's why the IFC is here. Here's how this issue will affect local fire departments. Here's why you need to pass this bill. Here's how this will help my department. Here is how this will help the fire service writ large. Here is how this will make Americans safer in their homes. And, we've had good luck with that. And our members are smart. They can usually answer most of the questions. And if they can't answer, they don't make stuff up. They just kind of say, let me get back to you. They're also respectful of the committee chairs and things like that. These days, people are getting a little flip with members of Congress, and our members are getting a little informal. But our witnesses are always professional. Quite frankly, they know that they're on C-SPAN. They can let their grandkids watch them on TV and not learn any new words. Which these days at some hearings, that's sometimes a problem. And our members comport themselves well. So, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great advice. And I've got all my notes in the margin here, and we're going to come back to it at the end because there's some great nuggets here. Shift gears a little bit away from the people. I want to pick your brain. Ken, what's coming down the pike? What do you think is probably coming up in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years that isn't even on our radar yet, right? That it's an emerging issue that as an industry we are underappreciating the significance of what might be coming down here that might significantly impact our organizations. It's okay if it's nothing because you've got your finger on the pulse of everything that might come. But I'm just curious what makes Ken LaSala lay awake at night worrying about if this thing comes up, how do we navigate it?
Well, there's a couple of things. It's really an interesting time, to be in the, I'm not in the fire service, I'm your lobbyist, but to be working on fire service issues. And I do, there is if you want to begin with that, but, I respect the work that you guys do. And, I'm not standing outside putting out a fire. There's a big difference. I think first from the terrorism perspective, we have to keep our eyes on what's going on overseas and the different tactics and techniques. I know one thing that a lot of folks are concerned about are the use of drones. I think what you saw both with the Israelis when they attacked the Iranians and what the Ukrainians did when they basically launched a sneak attack on the Russians. Unfortunately, that could happen here, and that would affect, local fire departments are going to have to figure out how you respond to, a drone wave hitting multiple locations at the same time. I mean, that's definitely a complex coordinated attack that we need to start thinking about how we're going to respond to that. Obviously, there's the use of fire as a weapon. Also, as the country gets more partisan with elections, there's always concern about civil unrest. We just saw that in Los Angeles earlier this year. You've got all those kind of issues from the, terrorism, domestic security perspective. I mean, wildland fires is still a huge issue. We're seeing the fires getting worse. They're spreading all across the country. So that's a big issue that, departments that used to not have to think about wildland fires now need to focus on them. You start looking at like what happened in Boulder, what happened even in LA, which were, those are, wildland fires, in the wildland urban interface, but really it was like, burned up burned up downtown Altadena. So, I mean, that's a real deal. What we consider wildland fires or even wildland urban interface fires end up becoming urban conflagrations. So that's a huge issue. You have all these alternative energy out there. Stephen on my staff is working on a bill to make e-mobility devices run by lithium batteries fire safe. Then you've got all the issues regarding lithium batteries in electric vehicles. And now we're looking at electric power walls and even, how you transport these big things by rail and how you respond to an incident with that and how you store and ship them so there's not a problem. And you've got autonomous vehicles. And then, we're going to have to look at changes if the Trump administration and the Big Beautiful Bill Act will end up affecting Medicaid. What does that mean for EMS response? What changes might there be down the road for Medicare and Medicaid, and how does that affect fire and EMS departments for being billed? And then, quite frankly, our country is getting older, so you're going to have to deal with older population, and what does that mean for EMS response? And that's why things like community paramedicine are important. So I'm comfortable with talking about all that stuff from the 5-year perspective. 10 years out, we'll see what else we got going, because I mean there's so much going on.
You've got plenty to keep you up at night. I see. I'm making the list and my blood pressure's going up, right? A lot of these things, it's interesting because we end up being in a very reactionary posture from a regulatory standpoint, right? I mean, we're not ahead of a lot of these. I think energy storage is one of those great examples of the technology outpaced the regulations, outpaced the fire safety initiatives, and now we're trying to play catch up. And the new technology is being developed, right? That is going to bring a completely different set of problems. So certainly appreciate you staying on top of those things. I've got one more question for you. If you're meeting with a brand new fire chief who is interested in becoming more involved in legislative affairs, you've mentioned some tools that you can use through the IAFC's website. But are there any other first steps you'd recommend, and how can they grow into that role effectively? Like what kind of practice should they be doing? Warm up exercises or things like that. Like how do we get better at this?
Yeah, I think most fire chiefs naturally know what's going on. There's not a lot different between when a fire chief talks to their senator or representative versus when you're talking to like your mayor or city council or something. Testifying before Congress is probably in most cases a little bit easier than testifying before the city council for your budget hearing. So I think a lot of the basic stuff is the same. And actually, to be honest, the Capitol is a really cool building, so it looks a lot nicer. So I would say that that part's actually a lot better. But the first step is like everything. You can go to the IFC's website, take a look at what we've got. Feel free to call us. In a lot of cases, too, it never hurts, especially from the Metro Department, to check in with the IFF, especially your local, see what the big issues that the IFF local is pushing. I'd say probably about 90% of them are the same as what the IFC is pushing. So it's interesting. You'll get a different perspective on the same issue. And then, like you mentioned, Chief, take a look at the member of Congress, get their background, and then literally you can just go online, put in a meeting request to meet with the member of Congress. And these days, you just fill out the drop-down menu, who you are. Do you want to meet in the district or do you want to meet, in D.C.? And then fill that out, and the scheduler will get back to you by email, and then you're off and running.
That's great.
Yep.
Ken, thank you for all this. I'm just going to kind of run through some of these takeaways if I could, and then I'll see if there's a bunch of stuff I missed. But I think one of the most compelling things you said that I don't know sitting in the seat that I really recognize was that the fire chief is the most trusted voice in the community, and I think that's really powerful, and that might open quite a few doors for us to go in and influence some change. We often talk about community trust being integral to what we need to do for our community, how we can help our community. And so it shouldn't be a surprise, but I hadn't heard it in this context, so that's super helpful. A lot of the IAFC resources, the weekly Washington update, the Hot Sheet Monthly, the Legislative Action Center that allows us to weigh in on a topic with a couple clicks, and entering our address, I think is an incredible tool that can maximize our feedback to them. Some of the things that are important right now, topics are appropriation bills, the FEMA reform, wildland consolidation, FirstNet, and we can influence these things if we're building relationships with our district and state directors and connecting with them, not necessarily only when we need something, but also just to build a relationship and telling them stories, be respectful of their time, have a beginning, a middle, and an end, consolidate your communications and make sure you're covering all the topics. If you don't know, say you don't know. Taking advantage of their recess time to get some quality time with them, give them a little bit of a break from perhaps all the mayhem that they deal with on a regular basis, and let them get into the community. I love the do your homework. I hate to do my homework, but I get it, right? The most successful folks are really doing their homework and preparing for testimony. Your laundry list of things that cause you insomnia, which I think we all share. But, and then really to wrap it up, the meeting requests, that we have the ability to just get online and access them, and perhaps they're going to prioritize us because of that trust that we're able to be gifted, right, in our communities and by our elected officials. So that's a ton to take away in an hour together, right, to talk about these issues. Anything else you that I didn't capture that you want to either reiterate or offer up as a closing thought before I let you go back to your amazing work?
Sure. Thanks, Chief Otten. Yeah, just two quick things. First of all, when you're meeting with your member of Congress, it's important to use the time wisely. A lot of them will start showing how they're still connected to the district, and you'll spend 10 minutes talking about the local football or baseball team. So you need to be polite, but also like, okay, that's great, but I need to talk to you about, AFG and SAFE or firefighter cancer, So you need to focus on that. And then two, always feel free to talk to the staff. The staff have more time. A lot of times the staff write the speeches, the staff do the research, and developing a good relationship with the staffer is great. And you never know, even that staffer will move up through the office, and they may end up sitting on committee of jurisdiction sometime, in which case they'll actually have a huge amount of control over these different bills. So, if you end up meeting with some 25-year-old or even younger, and you think like, what is going on here? Don't worry about it. Just play it straight, and just educate them on the issue, and treat them with respect, and they'll appreciate it. And that's how you start building a relationship with an office. So that'd be the big thing. But yeah, thanks again for your time today. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, at the very least, this will solve some folks' insomnia issues tonight. And, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about these issues. It's a lot of fun.
No, it's great. I mean, just having you here is awesome. And I will go out on a limb and speak for all of the folks that listen to this or watch this podcast, that how much we appreciate you being here and the work that you do for the fire service across the country. And just thank you. Thank you for that. So it's great to see you, as always. Well, that's it for today's episode of the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs Leadership Development Podcast. And thank you for taking the time to listen and learn with us. This series is created by Metro Chiefs for Metro Chiefs, but the lessons that we talked about here today really apply to leaders at every level across departments of all sizes here in the U.S. and to a lesser extent with this one around the world, right? Because all of the legislative processes are a little bit different. But I'm sure there are plenty of takeaways. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to subscribe to our channel, leave us a review, and share it with your colleagues. If you have ideas for topics that we should cover in the future, please send us an email and we'll get after it. Keep crushing it out there, and until next time, please continue to live out the Metro vision of being a place to belong, inspiring success. Yes. Have a great day.